right, I am happy to be joined with Dr. Lyle Oberg. He is the CEO of MYND Life Sciences. Dr. Oberg, great to have you back on again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's big news, obviously. MYND Life Sciences becomes the latest psychedelics company to list on the CSC in the next few days under the ticker symbol MYND. But unlike many others, your research is backed by a world-renowned Michael Smith Laboratory in BC and perhaps the best intellectual property IP in the entire sector, which is big. So I guess my first question I want to start off with is, why should investors pay attention to MYND Life Sciences and what should they look for?
Well, very succinctly, what we've discovered is essentially the how and why of psychedelics and how they work and why they work. We've moved beyond the is psychedelics going to help depression? Is psychedelics going to help CNS disorders? We've moved on into the how and why, and we've identified the gene pathway that actually leads to an improvement in depression, and it's through alleviating inflammation.
So you are, as we've said, talked in the past, a former finance minister of Alberta. And, just to kind of refresh a lot of the viewers and investors here, what got you involved, obviously, within this industry and what fascinated you about it the most?
Well, I'm a medical doctor as well, and I think it stems right back to that. And I was approached by Dr. Wilfred Jefferies, who works at the Michael Smith Laboratory, and indeed was the first person that Michael Smith ever hired at his laboratory. And he approached me with the idea about the gene pathway that he had discovered. And I did research into it and became absolutely fascinated. If you can make inroads into depression, just think of the good, positive stuff that can happen. And also the other thing, and the more you get into it, you start thinking about, well, why am I here?
Right.
And one of the reasons was I was never quite happy with psychiatric diagnoses when I was a practicing physician.
Interesting.
For DSM-5, for example, you have to have 5 symptoms of 8 over a 2-week period that are debilitating. That's not really an accurate way to diagnose a disease that leads to millions of deaths a year. So this was a great opportunity actually to delve more into the depressive disorders, into the psychedelic disorders. And it's really become fruitful. The things that we've learned, the things that we've done are quite amazing.
Well, some of the things I have found fascinating and actually learned from you in previous conversations is inflammatory. And this is a direct result of depression. I wanted to kind of press on you a little bit with that and maybe explain a little bit more as to what that means to provide some insight for some of the viewers, because I find it really interesting with some of the stuff that you've outlined about this before.
Yeah, the current thinking on depression, and MDD particularly, and we may have to subclassify MDD, major depressive disorder, is that it actually is a neuroinflammation. So it's actually a physical cause. And this came about with the relationship between rheumatoid arthritis, which is actually an inflammatory disease, as everyone knows, and depression. And it became that depression, they were not just depressed because they had rheumatoid arthritis, it was actually the same processes. And you're now seeing more and more papers that are coming out almost once a week, twice a week kind of thing, that are showing the relationship between depression and neuroinflammation. And what we've done is we've discovered the switch that actually turns it on and turns it off, turns it from a pro-inflammatory state, which is not good, to an anti-inflammatory state, which is good. And we've identified the genetic switch that does that. And literally, we're talking, a matter of hours, not days, weeks, or years. We're talking hours. It can flip that switch and actually see an improvement in the depression. So we're really, really excited about this. And obviously, most of this is being done in animal models right now, but we have reason to believe that it will certainly translate directly into humans.
That's incredible. Do you have an idea? I know you probably want to keep your cards close and you don't want to share, but exactly how that's done and what was that like as far as the medical team to come up with a solution like that? Because a lot of people you speak to, there's the research being done. And I know that you and I have had conversations in the past, but some of the advantages, I think, with working with UBC and the Michael Smith Laboratory, what are those advantages, knowing that amongst the research community globally, it's one of the most well-respected institutions. And I am curious to know too, what are some of the things I guess the industry's doing right versus maybe we need to improve on when you start talking and conversations get brought up time and time again about some of the research that's being done, say, in Jamaica and abroad?
Well, I think a couple of things. So first of all, no one can argue that UBC and the Michael Smith Laboratory is world class. And any research that is being done in order to be credible has to be world class, especially in a groundbreaking area like psychedelics, where you're taking a medication, a drug that was previously abused, and all of a sudden saying, well, this is actually pretty good and can help the human condition and help humans on the depression side. So that's one thing that we have going for us, obviously the UBC component. I think the second part of your question is, what do all the other companies have? Well, I would like to commend them, because what they're doing is they're taking the psychedelic industry and basically making it mainstream. What we're seeing now is people aren't talking about magic mushrooms in a way that, well, gee, I don't want to get high. They're talking about, what can they do for me? Can they actually help me? Is psilocybin, is MDMA, is all of these different psychedelics, how can they help me? And people are much more open-minded with that. And a lot of that has to do with companies that are there now.
Yeah.
And we're taking a different approach. We're actually looking at the individual molecule. We're finding the one that works in our gene pathway and going that route. But certainly the people that are out there experimenting, that are giving the psilocybin derivatives and other derivatives to patients and seeing improvement, that's what's actually propelling this industry forward at the moment.
One of the questions I always like to ask, and it's like important questions that investors need to know when entering into this space, and it's all about diversification. And MYND Life Sciences currently holds patents as many as 36 different psilocybin analogs alone. So I wanted to ask, how valuable is this IP, given that it's entirely possible the analogs might actually show better efficacy at treating depression and inflammatory conditions than psilocybin itself?
In 1980, or the late 1980s, the Prozac came out. Prozac made $3.8 billion for, I believe it was Pfizer, the first year that it came out.
In 1980, wow.
Yeah. So you're looking at a huge monetary upside if this works as we think it's going to work. Depression is a very common disease. There are estimates 12, 14, 16% of people are actually depressed at some time in their life. And if we can help that, if we can make a dent in that, there's a huge monetary reward that goes with it, because people don't want to be depressed.
Right.
They want to feel better. And that's what we theoretically could have the opportunity to do.
That's great. Psilocybin and psilocybin analog research that your company, MYND Life Sciences, has undertaken thus far has been in preclinical trial. So when do you expect to file an IND and to advance your research to the next level?
We hope to be in the IND phase within a year. We think that's very, very doable. We're actually in the process right now of planning out 6 independent studies. We're looking at working with a group in Australia who is doing psilocybin and depression in Australia with the Australian government. We're looking at a group out of Nashville that is actually utilizing IV ketamine. And again, we think that the psychedelic pathway, that many of these drugs work on that pathway. The other thing that we have is a biomarker. And the biomarker is especially interesting because, first of all, it can diagnose these conditions, but even more importantly, it can monitor them. So as the depression gets better, your biomarker will go down and will come up when it gets worse. You can try and jump ahead of it as it improves. So people are wanting our biomarker for their studies. We're also doing 4 studies of our own, and we hope to have them up and going by the 4th quarter of 21 of this year, and to get it rolling. So we've got an accelerated pace, but we think it's important enough. When you bring in AI, when you bring in these types of new procedures, you can actually expedite drug discovery very, very quickly. And I would reiterate that this is not something that just came on.
Right.
Dr. Jefferies and his staff have been working on this particular gene for upwards of 10 years.
Wow. One of the things I find fascinating about your team, including yourself, is that a healthy background, obviously, in capital markets yourself, used to run Yorkville Asset Management. So it'd be deep understanding, not only in the biotech, but obviously the capital market side as well. You just got done talking about different trials and partnerships potentially in Nashville, in Australia. When you look at this global landscape right now and how this has progressed, and I know the first conversations that you and I had was probably 4 or 5 months ago, How much change are you seeing, and what's the most encouraging thing that people should notice mostly about this industry and how it progresses day in and day out?
Well, I think that you're seeing worldwide acceptance of it. You're seeing
Yeah.
worldwide studies. And I think there's the obvious correlation with the cannabis industry, but cannabis has always been seen as a recreational drug, not necessarily a medicine, whereas psilocybin and some of the other psychedelics have never really been seen as a recreational drug. And there's absolutely zero intent of this to become a recreational drug. This is a medicine first and foremost. And I think that's a bit of a difference between the two. But just the acceptance of this worldwide is huge. And you're seeing studies, you're seeing Johns Hopkins has a psychedelic center. You're seeing Cambridge with it. You're seeing UCSD. You're seeing a lot of areas in the US that have centers of excellence of psychedelics. So we think we're right up there. We think we can take UBC to the top. We think we can take Canada to the top when it comes to psychedelic research.
Well, Chief Science Officer Dr. Wilfred Jefferies, he's part of your company, and it's duly noted that Michael Smith, who has received a Nobel Peace Prize, he started a research institution at UBC. And if I stand correctly, the first person that he contacted to assemble his research team was Dr. Wilford Jeffries. So talk about his qualifications and how someone like this will advance the overall direction of the company.
I think the word that comes to mind is legitimacy. We have a good, solid research team. Wilf and his staff. Wilf has got over 60 patents. He's been published over 100 times. We'll have an article coming out in the Lancet in the next 6 weeks. Myself, my background, again, being a medical doctor, but also being able to manage the financial markets through my experience as Minister of Finance in the province of Alberta, Minister in the government of Alberta for 12 years. That type of experience that I don't think you see in many other companies in this sector. And we've got a strong game plan, we've got a strong direction, and we're going to be there very, very soon.
Dr. Oberg, appreciate your time and congrats on this week.
Thank you.
All right, let's keep in touch.